me off to our meeting tonight. I am sure that most of you probably either know Charles or know of Charles, because he has become a well-known character on Bowen Island.
Exactly. A character.
You may have met him when you were doing your cold water swim around the island. You may have met him when he was addressing the Rotary Club, which he's done previously. He's given talks at the library. He's given talks to Bowen Food Society. He has been around. He's written articles in the Undercurrent. He has hosted potluck vegan dinners at his home. And socially, a lot of people have met Charles and also his lovely partner, Yunju, who is in Korea. So I'm not here to talk about Charles. We are here to listen to Charles, but I need to give just a very brief introduction because this is someone who has a CV that is this long. It's amazing. As you may know, Charles grew up partially on Bowen Island because his grandfather had a cabin here near Mount Gardner Dock, and that's where Charles lives right now in a beautiful home overlooking the water. But he actually grew up in California. He got his PhD at Davis, University of California, and his PhD was in genetics with a focus on biology. After that, his career just flew off, starting with the Hunger Project in the 80s. He was there for quite a while, and then in 1991 he joined. Do you call it UNDP or do you call it UNDP? You call it UNDP, United Nations Development Program. And literally since that time, Charles has worked for the United Nations. He has been either in New York at the headquarters or traveling around every single. Have you been to Antarctica? Have you been to Australia? No. Okay. He has spent a lot of time traveling and a lot of time working at the United Nations headquarters. His focus has been huge. It has been ecology, it has been problems with deforestation, problems with famine, with indigenous people who have been affected because of deforestation, dietary issues, food. Charles knows pretty much everything about everything as far as I can tell. He, in 2017, he changed from UNDP to UNEP, which is the environment program. And I just have to read to you what the focus is of the UN environmental program. It is the leading global environmental authority that sets the world's environmental agenda, promotes the coherent implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development within the United Nations system, and serves as an authoritative advocate for the environment. Charles has amazing, and he is right there. He is a senior advisor for climate and forests. Am I right? Please correct me, because this is a lot of stuff. And he has literally been to, I don't know how many COP conferences you've been to. Have you actually
most of
counted
them?
And of course he was at the last one, and he's going to talk to us about COP28. Then, as if all this stuff was not sufficient, he has just become a senior fellow at the Meridian Institute. So the Meridian Institute is an organization that examines and provides solutions to the way we live, the economy, and the environment. Here is a senior fellow, and he lives on Bowen. It's amazing. So you would imagine that someone with a background like this would be a really arrogant stuffed shirt that wouldn't talk to anyone. Well, no, further from the truth. This guy is the most charming, unassuming, friendly fellow that you can imagine. And he lives right amongst us. We are so fortunate to have him here, and we hope that he will stay.
You can count on
Do you
it.
promise?
Yes, yeah, no question.
Anyway, I have great pleasure in
Thank
asking
you.
Charles to talk to us about these two amazing events that he has not only attended, but been intimately involved in.
Wow, okay,
Thank
well,
you so
thank
much.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Hilly. I don't know where you got all that information. Most of it was pretty correct. But I'm actually going to retire from the UN next week. So this is the last presentation I'll be making as a UN official. What do you think of that? So thank you for coming out tonight. I have been furiously working for the past few days to try to figure out what happened in important events and how to communicate about it. And once again, I spent more time on this presentation than I did, as I said last time, when I spoke to 1,000 religious leaders from 125 countries representing 1 billion people. So that's just letting you know how important you are to me. And I just got back from Bowen last week. I was in the Vatican and other places, and I'm so excited about what I saw and learned, and I hope I can find words to convey what I learned and saw. But I also promised you people last year that I would do a talk about what happened in the climate conference. So I would have done that last month or even in January, except when I went back to New York, I got called on jury duty and got thrown into the National Rifle Association case. Can you imagine? So I was stuck on that for a while. I didn't end up on a Trump case, which I was dying for. I want to throw him in jail as quickly as possible. I'm prepared here. This is a real challenge. I've never obviously done this talk before because I just finished it about 5 minutes before I got here. But I'm trying to do 3 things tonight, and I don't know how far I'm going to get in these 3 things. The first thing is, what the heck happened at that climate meeting in Dubai? The second thing is, what the heck happened with Pope Francis just exactly 10 days ago? I was sitting with Pope Francis, and he organized a great meeting honoring Indigenous peoples. That's part 2. And then the third part is, can I convey to you what I said in that conference? So 3 things. We'll see how far we get. If you start to droop off and fall off your chairs, I'll know I've gone too far. So let's start off with COP. So how many people know what the heck COP stands for? Oh, a few of you, but not everyone. It stands for Conference of the Parties, and that's a generic, global civil servant kind of term, which refers to the body of institutions that oversees international agreements. So whenever an international treaty is signed, there's a conference of the party established to basically make decisions about how to implement that treaty. And there are all kinds of COPs all over the world, but the ones that you hear about are the ones related to the Climate Convention, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, a mouthful, and the Biodiversity Convention. So 154 countries signed the Climate Conference in June 1992, agreeing to combat climate change. Don't you wish that we'd actually taken some action in 1992 rather than finding ourselves in this freaking mess right now? I mean, I started at the UN in 1992, so I've watched the debacle and participated in it in all this time. And I'll say more about that in a moment. There are now 198 countries signed on to the Climate Convention. And these meetings happen almost every year. So 28 means that's the 28th of these meetings. And the last one was in Dubai in December. Each year there's a different president, a different city, a different country, and the reason is it's a rotating plant, so it rotates across the 5 UN regions: Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and Western European. So that's why we have this incredible situation of 3 COPs in a row organized by a petrostate, by an oil-producing, oil-dependent country. That's a problem. Last year it was Egypt. This year, Dubai, part of the United Arab Emirates. And next year is Azerbaijan. 3 in a row. And it's a real problem, as I'll explain, because the COP president has a lot to do with what gets agreed or not. And to have a COP presidency that's economy is dependent on the very thing that's killing the planet, fossil fuels, that's a bit of a problem. So anyway, just wanted you to understand that background. So as I said, my career started at the Rio Earth Summit. That was my first assignment, can you imagine? 1992. So I've been following this stuff in that time. My focus has been on the biodiversity and the climate convention. The desertification convention also came out of Rio. So this COP was the largest in history, with over 85,000 people attending, and the convention center was bigger than Central Park in New York City. Can you imagine? And having just ruined my knee, I had a really hard time getting from one end of this thing to another, but it was immense. And it happened in the first 2 weeks of December. So just a little bit about where are we with the climate crisis? And the Copernicus Global Climate Report of 2023 just came out recently, and it showed that 2023 was the hottest year ever in terms of, as long as we have records. Records going back to 1850. Last year was the hottest ever. And it also finds that in the 12-month period ending last month, that it looks like the global temperature has edged above 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. Now, it's edged above. That doesn't mean it's, permanently above. It looks like there's still another decade or 2 to actually get there permanently if we don't turn it around. But that's a really significant thing. In Paris, in the Paris climate meeting, the whole world committed to making sure we don't go above 1.5. We're already almost there. That's a problem. And it's not only the temperatures that's the problem, it's the things that you've been noticing, the increasing extreme weather events that are just crippling countries and communities around the world. That over the last year, I think we've all seen extreme weather events, heat waves, floods, droughts, and fires. And you may be wondering, why is that happening? And I found an interesting slide that sort of tells the story, and I'm going to quiz Hillary. Read this line here. That's why we put the chairs so close, because I knew. Oh, and by the way, I wanted to apologize for the crappy slides. You're going to see a lot of crappy slides. I'm not used to making my own slides, and now I'm on my own, and I have no idea how to make slides. But this is what I came up with, the best I could do. This slide may help us understand why every month we're seeing historically unprecedented extremes of weather. And the International Governmental Panel on Climate Change took one type of extreme event, heat waves, and asked the question, what will happen to these extreme events when we're 1 degree above centigrade? What will happen when we're 1.5 degrees? What will happen when we're 2 degrees above? And this pattern applies to all these extreme events, the rainfall, the heat, the flooding, the droughts, the storms and fires. But just to take this one example. So before industrialization, a particular extreme heat event would happen on average once every 50 years. Imagine that. Now, after we've heated up the atmosphere by just 1 degree, the likelihood of that kind of extreme event that would have been 1 out of 50 is now 5 times greater. 5 out of 50 will have that extreme event. Now, if you move to 1.5 degrees, which we're close to, that kind of extreme event will likely happen 9 times more frequently. So 9 years out of 50 are going to have these huge heat waves that kill people and do terrible things. And we're actually headed, as I'll say in a moment, to a future of more than 2 degrees of warming. And when we get there, it'll be 14 times more likely to have these extreme events. And if we get to 4 degrees, well, game over. So a year or 2 ago, we had an extreme event here on Bowen that killed millions of mussels. How many people remember that? That was, and that was a really unusual event. So, you know, those kinds of things are happening all over the world. I'm in touch with friends deep in the Amazon. They've been setting records on drought this year and then floods immediately afterwards. And it's because with every fraction of an increase of average temperature, the likelihood of these extreme events increases 5, 10, 20 times. And I just wanted, you know, us to understand that. This, you know, when you look at, this is a map of the world of precipitation, you'll see that all over the world there are extremes of way over average rainfall and way under average rainfall. Climate change, for example, doesn't mean global warming. It means cold some places. It's caused a disruption of the climate system. Same with rain, too much or too little. So let me just summarize what happened in the COP, and then I want to come back and step you through each of the major elements. So the COP began with the creation of a new fund on loss and damage. This issue has been contentious for decades. Developing countries have been saying, listen, you assholes are the one who caused this problem. We did the least to cause it, and we're suffering the most. We want compensation. When we can't adapt, when our when our farms are lost, when our houses are lost, when our countries are lost, we want compensation. So this was a huge agreement that this establishment of this fund. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. The other thing at the end of the COP was agreement for the first time in history that we would phase out, transition out of fossil fuels. That also was a hard-fought battle. And the main kind of focus of this COP was what's called the Global Stocktake. And I'm sure you've never heard that term before. The Global Stocktake was what was agreed at Paris, that every 5 years there would be a very rigorous assessment of where we are with these issues, what needs to happen, who's doing what. And this is the first one. Because of COVID and so on, that got delayed. So the Global Stocktake was an important development. And the findings of the Global Stocktake are kind of interesting. What one was that we're now headed to a future of about 2.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. That's a real problem, but it isn't as bad a problem as we were headed at the time of the Paris Climate Conference. At that time, we were headed to 4 degrees. So we've made progress. So let's be hopeful about that we've actually bent the curve. We were going like this, and now we're just going like this. So that's one of the major conclusions of the stocktake that caught my eye. There's also a persistent emissions gap. When you add up what every country in the world is committed to, that dog don't hunt. It just doesn't get us where we need to get. So there's this persistent, but that emissions gap is closing slightly. Countries are not committing to do enough yet. And this decision to transition away from fossil fuels, this was the first time in the 30-year history that those dirty words, fossil fuels, were ever mentioned. And there's a reason for that, because of intense pressure from oil and gas interests in oil countries to make sure that we never put our eye on the thing that's causing 70% of the problem. So that was significant, and yet it was limited in a way. I'll say more about that. There was significant progress outside the formal negotiations, and this is an interesting pattern that I've noticed over the 30 years. 30 years ago, these COPs, all that mattered what was happening in the negotiating rooms. But gradually, civil society has gotten more and more active, and it's really been interesting to me to watch this explosion of activity from NGOs and philanthropies and indigenous peoples and youth and women, and the kind of galvanization of action is what I find most exciting and most important. And I would argue that in a way, that activity is sort of taking over from where international negotiations is not winning the day. Let's see, what else to say about that? There was limited progress. The adaptation issue, which I won't say much about, adapting to climate change is obviously important because we're facing it. There wasn't much progress there. Finance, the most important issue, really didn't make the day. It didn't get enough money, and it's unclear, even though the commitment was to triple. Do I say that? Maybe that's the next slide. We triple renewable energy and double energy efficiency. There was no agreement on how to pay for that. Okay, so next slide. So these are the key issues I want to unpack. The fossil fuel clean energy, the loss and damage issue, nationally determined contributions. It's more negotiator gobbledygook, but it means it's what national commitments. It's a national commitment plans. But so NDC, remember that term, we'll be saying a lot about that. Food, amazing breakthrough in food. Cities, amazing breakthroughs in cities. Methane, forest, which is the love of my life, one of them. That got some attention. So let's look at the first one. Rapid shift from fossil fuels to clean energy. So there was a call, a very heavily negotiated call to transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems in a just, orderly, and equitable manner to achieve net zero by 2050. And also, as I said, a commitment to triple the world's renewable energy and double energy efficiency. Interestingly, with regard to renewable energy commitment, renewables are now mostly the cheapest energy option around the world, which is an amazing thing. Like, we couldn't have said that a few years ago. The cheapest option for energy. But those installations require more investment than other kinds of technologies. And so when you have interest rates and misaligned policies, that they often put wind and solar out of reach for developing countries. So that's a really big issue for the next COP, is that you can be committed to tripling renewable energy, but you better be investing in finance for that, for developing countries to have access to that. And this thing about transition away from fossil fuels, there are two problems when you read the fine print. One is that it kind of opens the door to transitional fuels. And this was the escape hatch for the oil companies, is that they really allow natural gas to sort of hang around. And this natural gas, methane, is the third most carbon-intensive method of generating electricity. And that is very much still in play. And we're seeing it here with this liquefied natural gas plant, which just drives me crazy. We'll talk about that another day, but that's one thing. The other thing is there's an escape hatch related to what's called carbon capture and storage technology. So basically the oil companies are saying, we can't get rid of all fossil fuels, but we'll just capture it and store it. Now this technology has been languishing for decades, and there's nobody in their right mind who thinks that it has a big role to play in the future. So there were a couple of little caveats that bother people. And then what's next? What's next is really countries need to now take these goals and incorporate them into their nationally determined contributions. Every country, because of the Paris Agreement, has to come in 2025 with a whole new plan on how they're going to ratchet up or ratchet down their emissions. And they now need to embed these commitments in these plans. So, loss and damage. This fund, as I mentioned, is designed to help climate-vulnerable countries deal with the impacts that go beyond anything they can adapt to. That means dealing with rebuilding their homes after climate disasters, supporting farmers when their crops are wiped out, and relocating people who have been displaced by rising seas. The amount of money that was agreed at Dubai was 700 million, which sounds, important, and it is, but it's really a drop in the ocean compared to the estimated $580 billion in climate-related damages vulnerable countries are expected to face in the coming years. So it's a start, but we need a whole lot more. At the same time, so what's next is countries need to come forward with larger pledges. That's pretty straightforward. So these national climate commitments, or what's the term? NDCs, that's right. So the Global Stocktake calls on countries to bring forth these new NDCs for COP30, which is going to be in Brazil, by the way, in 2025, and come up with new targets and new plans. And they have to be more ambitious. And the understanding is to keep 1.5 degrees, even within the scope of possibility, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 60% below 2019 levels by 2035. So it's a heavy lift. Next is that governments need to start next year and prepare these plans. Food, okay, now we're talking. Do you like that food finally gets on the menu?
Yes.
I've spent some time with you all in the past talking about the food system, and I'm letting you off the hook a little bit tonight, but don't forget, shifting diet and eating more plants is still critical for our health, the planet's health, and the way forward. So I just won't be saying too much about this, but fortunately, for the first time in history, the food issue landed on the climate agenda. It's unbelievable, and it's really exciting. And you might also say, why the hell did it take so long? Which is really a valid question. And this issue exploded outside the negotiations. This is one of those issues where outside the negotiations, NGOs and civil society groups of all kinds, think tanks and all kinds of philanthropies, even businesses, emphasize the importance of food. It's been historically left out of the COP. By the way, there have been a lot of issues like that in the past. The forest issue was completely ignored until 2011, and I spent the last 15 years driving that agenda into the climate agenda. Also, the Indigenous Peoples agenda has been ignored for the first 20 years, and that's been a focus of my life too, in getting the Indigenous Peoples issues into the climate convention in a serious way. So 159 countries covering 80% of the world's land signed the Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems, and Climate Action, and committed to embedding these priorities into their NDCs. And when we talk about transforming the food system, it means many things. One is producing food in a more sustainable way. It also means reducing the loss and the waste of food. A third of all our food is wasted. And it also means shifting away from meats towards animals and other things as well. So this new reference to food and food systems was a significant breakthrough in these negotiations, and it's the time when food truly came of age as the central issue that it is. So all countries now need to incorporate this issue into their NDCs and come to the next COPs with some progress. Of course, the success of these pledges will be determined by how they follow through, but also companies, farmers, civil society also made commitments, and they need to follow through. And just a reminder for something we've talked about before, the unsustainable food production systems are largely responsible for destroying the world's ecosystems, undermining human health, and fueling climate change. And just the current food system we have, it kills 1 in 5 people. It produces between a quarter and a third of all the greenhouse gas emissions, and a large part of that comes from cows. It causes 80% of all the loss of species. It gobbles up 70% of all the fresh water, and a third of it's wasted. That's 1 billion tons of food. So this topic is important and worth another talk on another day. Okay. Another success, in my view, cities and subnational actors played a much larger role in this COP than ever before. The final COP agreement reflects a growing understanding of cities as critical climate battlegrounds and partners for action. It's a fitting recognition because 70% of all the carbon dioxide emissions come from urban areas. I feel a little vindicated because in 2006, in South Africa, I gave the keynote address to the World Congress of the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. And I said, the battle to save the global environment will be won or lost in cities. And that headline was picked up by the South African newspapers, and I was just looking at it again. So I've been saying this for a while, and I'm so glad that it's being integrated into the climate convention. But enough boasting. So let's see what else to say about that. So again, what's next is more ambitious targets in these next NDCs. And that'll focus on transportation, energy, housing, air quality, and other issues for the urban poor. Okay, moving through our list. Pledges and finance to curb methane. So methane, there was an encouraging slate of actions to address methane pollution. This is a greenhouse gas that is 20 times more powerful than...
80 times.
No, 20 times.
Over 100 years. 80 times over 10 or 20 years.
Oh, okay. All
Which
right.
is
Well,
what matters.
great. It's a lot more powerful than CO2. And methane also accounts for 30% of all the warming that's happened since pre-industrial times. 30% is it because of this methane. So in Dubai, governments, companies, philanthropies, and others announced over $1 billion in new grants. That's more than tripling what they've done in the past. And 5 more nations joined the Global Methane Pledge, and all kinds of things happen. So this is really important, and that's positive. And again, what's next? You guessed it, incorporated in the next NDC. Forrest, and this is my issue. As I mentioned, I spent the last 15 years working on this issue. It continues to get attention. The facts are, without stopping tropical deforestation, you can't solve the climate crisis. There are a lot of ways you can't solve the crisis. This is one of them. It's also one of the cheapest, easiest, most effective ways to deal with it. And there was quite a bit of attention on the forest issue and on indigenous peoples, empowering them. A couple more $1 billion were allocated, a bunch of funds, and it was encouraging what happened there. And also there's movement towards more and more funding going to indigenous peoples. It's really interesting, and being with leaders of indigenous peoples last week in the Vatican, I got an update on that there's efforts to platforms being created to direct finance directly to indigenous peoples. And I'll say a little more in the next part. Okay, so summary, what the heck, where are we? So for the first time, as we said, all nations agreed to move away from fossil fuels. Formally, that we agreed to ramp up renewable energy and energy efficiency. And now all the negotiators have left Dubai and are on their way home to, they're home by now, surely. It's been 3 months. And God pray that they're working on their new NDCs. So it's up to countries to translate this UAE consensus, is what it's called, into their work. So global agreements can send the right signals, but it's the world's fate is really ultimately determined by whether countries play their part in addressing the climate challenge. And civil society action outside, as I said, has really grown in importance, and I think that's an encouraging thing in many ways. One other thing that happened in Dubai that was not completely unexpected, in the sense that a number of us have been working on this for a lot of years, and that is getting religious leaders and faith communities engaged in this issue. That, with 80% of human beings associating with one religion or another, that's most of humanity, leveraging the moral authority, the political influence, the economic power of religious leaders is critical to achieve our goals. And the last 6 years of my life have been focused on this agenda. I never, ever expected to go that way. But I got a call from the government of Norway 6 years ago saying that we're just not going to reach our goals without engaging, and I'm the one to figure it out. So that's what I've been doing. And as I said, I'll be retiring next week, so I'll be looking for my next assignment. Now, since Pope Francis released his Laudato Si on caring for a common home in 2015, the engagement of faiths has increased greatly. And as I said, my own work has been very much focused on this. And so first time ever there was a faith pavilion, I'll show you some photographs in a minute, where all the religious leaders from all over the world. It's amazing. I spent a lot of time in this pavilion with every kind of religious leader you could imagine coming in. Pope Francis was deeply committed to coming, but he got very sick, and so we had to send him a message instead. So that was a great thing. It was, they were able to exert a lot of political influence with statements and so on. And my own work is on I created and leading the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. It's an effort to mobilize religious leaders to protect the tropical forests. We work in the 5 countries that hold 70% of the world's tropical forests: Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Indonesia. And it provides a platform for religious leaders to roll up their sleeves and make things happen. So this is this Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. And here's the Faith Pavilion. You'll see all kinds of religious leaders. We had events. My interfaith team were there doing things. We more on the Faith Pavilion. It was really kind of a hub of activity in Dubai. There were all kinds of events, all kinds of topics related to climate. Anyway, it was productive time. Now I want to say just a few words about Brazil, because this is the Minister of Environment for the government of Brazil. Her name is Marina Silva, and she's one of the most inspiring people I've ever met. But I want to talk about Brazil briefly because the most exciting developments on the climate front are really happening there. Over the past year and a half, President Lula and Minister Marina Silva took office, and in the last year alone, 2023, the deforestation rate dropped by 50% compared to the previous years under President Bolsonaro, the Trump of Brazil. Minister Silva was the daughter of a rubber tapper. She's incredibly effective, committed, and she's been very supportive of my work on the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. And this is an indigenous leader, Raquel Topinambas from the state of Pará, and she has worked with our effort to create a 3D virtual reality film of the Amazon. And the point was, because most Brazilians have no idea about the Amazon, so they decided to bring the Amazon to the religious leaders and political leaders with 3D technology. And I'm going to get a set to show you because it's just awesome. And she guides you, the indigenous woman guides you through the Amazon, and you're flying through the Amazon. It's absolutely amazing. It's winning awards. It's just crazy. I wanted you to be aware of that. And then later I'm going to show you a picture of Sonia Guajajara, who is an indigenous woman who also has been leading our work on the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. She's now the Minister of Indigenous Affairs in the government of Brazil, the first time in history that an indigenous person is a minister. And she was with me in the Vatican last week, and she's just amazing. Brazil holds 60% of the Amazon, and given the immense role of the Amazon in determining our global climate and water system, Brazil is critical for the future. And this new administration gives me real hope. Here, this is the food court, in one of the food courts in Dubai. As I said, the campus was as big as Central Park, or bigger. But the minister of the United Arab Emirates, Minister of Climate and Environment, committed before the COP that 2/3 of all the food would be plant-based. Can you imagine? For 30 years, I've been starving at these COPs. For the first time, it was amazing. And so here's all of these. All the little trailers were all vegan food. It was amazing. And this is just the final session. This was like an overflow room of overflow rooms. And there's John Kerry giving a final statement at the end of the COP, just to give you a sense of the size of it. So then, of course, the most important thing of all, the Rotary Club. So I saw a booth. I saw reference to a Rotary booth. I said, I have to know who are these people and what are they doing? So I went over, and they were doing events and organizing things. So I met these people, and we had a good talk, and I promised to help them with the COP29 in Azerbaijan. So it's really interesting. I keep bumping into Rotary. In fact, just a week and a half ago, I was in Bonn, Germany in a meeting and on the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and the person told me they're in dialogue with Rotary, something called the Rotary Club. I said, I've heard of them. I know about them. And so anyway, we're starting to rock on all in all ways. So this now brings me to part 2, right? We've just done 1 of 3 parts. I think the third part's shorter. So I was invited a few months ago to participate in a conference that was entitled Indigenous Peoples Knowledge and the Sciences, combining traditional knowledge and science on innovations for resilience to address climate change, biodiversity loss, food security, and health. All my issues. I was so happy to go back and look at this place. This is a little bit of a show and tell, a little bit of substance here. Just to say that this conference was the latest in a series of events and reports and activities in support of Indigenous peoples sponsored by Pope Francis and the Vatican. And I've been extremely impressed, inspired, moved by how this Pope has gone all in on not only on the climate issue, the biodiversity issue, but on Indigenous peoples' rights. It's absolutely inspiring. I'm going to show you a slide in a moment of when he went to the Amazon in 2018. He said to the government of Peru, I'm not going to land in the capital. I'm going to land in the Amazon because I want to meet the original people first. And there he was. I was there January 18th, 2018. 10,000 Indigenous peoples with Pope Francis. He honored them in the most inspiring way. So I just can't get enough of him. From the Laudato Si, that he, his caring for Earth, to meetings. He did a whole synod, which is the rules of how the Catholic Church work, on the Amazon. He's in this workshop and all kinds of things. So he is prioritized, and I watch him greet the Indigenous leaders, and my friends, it's to watch them play together is unbelievable. This guy's the real deal. So this conference was at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. This thing goes back to the 1600s. In fact, I'm going to show you a slide showing that Galileo was one of the first members of the Pontifical Academy. And some of the most influential Indigenous leaders from Africa, Asia, Latin America, activists and scholars were all in this meeting, just 50 of us, and we all did a paper, and it's going to be a publication of some kind soon. And the speakers shared examples of how Indigenous knowledge benefits their food production, their health care, and how we can learn from them on how to better manage our environment. And one insight that I had, what came so painfully clear to me, was that we're all suffering from the droughts, the floods, the extreme weather, and so on. We're suffering to some extent. But those people, the Indigenous peoples, the local communities, it's a whole nother thing. It's their lives, it's their lifestyle, it's their food, it's their very existence. And I just became really aware of the impact of all these things, which for me is a slight inconvenience, that a million mussels died last week, or that this heat wave or the fires, but for them, the impacts are really extreme. And so somehow I left renewed in my commitment to do something about this. Another insight I had was that I heard there was a convergence between Indigenous knowledge and modern science on, you guessed it, food systems. And there was an agreement to avoid processed and ultra-processed food and sugar, eat whole grains, eat more plants. It was amazing to see the scientists and the Indigenous people coming to the same conclusion. I was validated. So I want to give you a sense of Pope Francis' view of things. Can you read that, Hillary, from back then?
The big words.
So he said, we should, in many places he's written, we should listen to Indigenous peoples more and learn from their way of life. And he said the contribution of Indigenous peoples is fundamental in the fight against climate change. He said, I ask governments to recognize the Indigenous peoples of the whole world with their cultures, languages, traditions, and spirituality, and to respect their dignity and their rights. God has made us stewards, not masters of the planet. All of us are called to an ecological conversion, a commitment to saving our common home. And that's really what he thinks. That's who he is. And I just love it. So the conference started in the most auspicious way. And I took this picture. He was standing right in front of me. Look at this. I can't make this up. This is the Clementine Room. I'm reading a book. I have the history of the whole Vatican. I read a 10-hour flight. I read this book, The History of the Vatican. I can't answer all the questions, but I know a whole lot about the Vatican now. So this was just 10 days ago, and he honored these indigenous. Here's Sonia Guajajara, here's me, and he honored them with time, and I thanked him for his incredible work in this area, like I'm saying here. He also often asks, pray for me. Isn't it interesting? He ends all his talks saying, pray for me. So I said to him, I'm praying for you. Let's see. What's next? Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. 1300s. So this is my time. This was the second time I had met him. I don't know if he remembered the first time or not. He's probably seen 1 million people since I last saw him. So this is a little bit about the Pontifical Academy. Look at Galileo Galilei was appointed as a member on August 25th, 1610. Wow. I don't know if that's before he said that the Earth goes around the sun or after. So this is the room. Interesting room, isn't it? Just to give you a sense, and so through the 2 days, we just all gave our various talks, and then just a couple of insights into this whole issue of indigenous peoples. And here is, I think for those who can't read, due to their stewardship, combined with their lifeways, knowledge systems, and connection to place, the vast majority of indigenous peoples' lands remain in good to moderate condition, accounting for 39% of the Earth's most ecologically intact lands. Indigenous peoples thus play an outsized role in protecting while managing places that provide local benefits such as food, medicine, and cultural well-being, as well as critical global benefits such as biodiversity protection, climate change mitigation, and other ecosystem services. So a lot of the conference was reviewing this, and I just put this slide together today just to remind you that indigenous peoples comprise 5% of the world's population, but they safeguard 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity, an important service. And deforestation, carbon emissions, and biodiversity loss are much lower on their lands than any other land. In fact, when you even compare national parks and degradation of national parks, usually indigenous peoples' management is better with less loss even than that. There's all kinds of studies. I'm involved in a new study using really high-tech satellite data down to 30-meter resolution, comparing indigenous peoples' lands with all kinds of land uses. That's going to be an interesting report. So there's, the studies show that deforestation rates are either 2 to 3 times lower, or even 3 to 4 times lower in indigenous peoples' land. So that's why it's so important. That's one more reason, in addition to the human rights aspect, to protect them and support them. This is the group together, and this is Sonia Guajajara, who is the Minister of Indigenous Affairs for Brazil, an inspiration. Okay, check this out. I took all these pictures, can you believe it?
Wow, how'd you get on there?
This was I'd never been to the top of St. Peter's Basilica, looking down. And this is the Vatican Museum, and this is the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. It's an amazing building. I have lots of other pictures, but I just want to show you one. You're not going to believe this. This is called Domus Sanctae Martyr. This is where Pope Francis lives, on the 2nd floor. And here's a little known fact. I was so surprised. Wednesday before last, I arrived in Rome, and they took me to this building. And I walked in, and kind of like a hotel, I said, this is interesting. And they said, here's your key, and by the way, Pope Francis is having dinner in there, so when you go in, don't bother him or take pictures. So I said, okay. So I walked in, and there was Pope Francis having a meeting with people right there. And then I went, sat down, and they served me dinner and so on. And then he walked off later in the evening. I was so surprised that he lives in that building on the second floor. My room was on the first floor, so he was right upstairs. And he has, huh?
The right price for it.
Yes, that's right. I think that's right. I feel blessed. He refuses to live in the palace, the Pope's palace, which has been built since the 1300s, and every pope has lived there. He says no. He lives with the people. And a guy in the Pontifical Academy told me a story that last June the G7, the group of seven of the richest countries in the world, had a meeting in Rome, and they all came to the Vatican. And there were hundreds of thousands, maybe, of Secret Service and police. And Biden had an entourage of 28 cars, and so did every other head of state. And this guy was staying in this domus right here. And he said he went to breakfast that day when all the world was crazy. He walks up, and there's Pope Francis serving himself at the breakfast buffet. Can you imagine? It's just so stunning. And I now understand. I've watched him when he's sick, when he's like he was even pretty sick there, but he still agreed to meet all of us. He's just unbelievable. So I'm electrified by that. And look at, I had free reign of the gardens of the whole Vatican. This is the Eagle Grotto, and there's a whole history of this, and it's just walking around. I felt so honored. It was amazing. And there's Michelangelo's Pita, and one of the benefits to staying in this place was that when you have the key, you can walk right up to St. Peter's, show to the Swiss guards, and they let me right into the basilica. So 3 times a day I was going into the basilica just to want it. So I've never been more honored in my entire life. Okay, so that's the first part of the talk. And I think this. I think what I'll do is just briefly summarize what I talked about at the Vatican, if I can figure out how to show. So this was my title. I think this is the longest title in history. The critical role of indigenous peoples in addressing the twin crises of climate change and loss of nature, how powerful new partnerships between indigenous peoples, faith communities, and science to protect forests can turn the tide. A case study of the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. What a mouthful. I actually was the longest title of all the 50 talks. Quite a distinction. I don't think so. So just the basic point of my talk was that we're facing the obvious twin crisis of climate change, of biodiversity loss. It's threatening all life on the planet. And the second premise is that an historically important change is underway before our very eyes with respect to the growing understanding, support for, and critical role of indigenous peoples. And that's what I really wanted to talk to these people about. In my 30 years with the UN, I've watched the power influence of indigenous peoples increase greatly until now. There's really, it's a different world. And in my paper, I haven't finished writing it, I'm documenting how that happened. And it's good news because of what we said earlier, that indigenous peoples' culture, ways of life, and spirituality have a powerful and positive impact on addressing those two crises. So let's just see what I can quickly do here. So just a word about, I mentioned that Pope Francis went straight to the Amazon. He said to the president of Peru, I'm not going to land in Lima, I'm landing in the Amazon. This is him here with 10,000 indigenous peoples. I took these pictures too, see, not bad. And the president of the country and all the government people were in the back of the room. The indigenous peoples were in the front of the room. That's just one more example of how he cares for indigenous peoples. So in Brazil, I wanted to say just a couple of things. Our work, this is Carlos Vicente, who, when I first met Levin and Judith, the day he agreed to be hired was the day I learned how to ice swim with these guys. He was the guy who got hired that day a couple of years ago. And he's just doing amazing work. And wanted to say a little bit about the way he's going about educating the evangelical leaders. The evangelical leaders in Brazil rule the country. They put Bolsonaro in power and they took him out. And Carlos is an evangelical himself. He's also a scientist. He's worked with Marina Silva for 20 years. He's amazing. And so what he did is he created scientific immersion trainings for these evangelicals who literally, when they write books and they go online and they post, tens of millions of people are influenced. So he went after them. And he arranged a rigorous 2-day training course in Brazil's most prominent scientific institutions. And he brought them, taught them the science of the causes and prevention of the climate disasters and alternative bioeconomy development models. So this immersion training activates these religious leaders to educate their own constituencies and to encourage political authorities to enact laws that protect forests and the rights of indigenous people. And this is important because the vast majority of the Brazilian public has no understanding, no connection of the fact that the climate disasters they are experiencing now in their cities are intimately connected to the destruction of forests in the remote Amazon regions. And so this training is really activating these religious leaders. One of them, who has millions of followers, was about to publish a book. After this training, he changed the entire book around after this information. So that's one exciting piece of work that's going on. And then here's let's see, these were the Catholics, and these are the evangelicals, and here are some interreligious groups. And then the second thing I wanted to say was this Amazonia Viva virtual reality film. It's a dazzling, award-winning film based on indigenous knowledge that gives you a 10-minute immersive experience of actually being in the Amazon. And as I said, the Amazon is unknown to the vast majority of Brazilians, especially the younger generations. And this film is guided by that indigenous woman I showed you earlier, and she takes you through. And the film's message combines traditional knowledge with scientific knowledge. For example, the narrator, the indigenous woman, tells us, it rains in the Amazon because there is a forest. It rains in the Amazon because there's a forest, not there is a forest because there is rain, which is what science has taught us in the past. In other words, it's the forest that causes the rain, not the rain that causes the forest. And if we destroy the forest, then we destroy access to life-giving water that we need for food and other needs. So this was an example of ancestral indigenous knowledge from the Amazon that is captured in this film. It's a powerful film, and it's now featured in museums all over Brazil. 50,000 people participated in One by One last year, and it's having a huge impact.
Did you see it here in Canada?
You know, yes, I'm going to ask Carlos for, we just need, does anybody have VR equipment? I can get the file. But I think that's a good idea. We should have it right here in Artisan. Anybody who wants to have that experience, you'll see people going like this because you're flying, you're seeing the rivers, and the most amazing thing is they got the smell technology for the first time in history. They combined virtual smell with virtual seeing. And I met the engineer in Dubai who developed the technology, and I should have thrown those slides in here too. And I tried it out. You can literally, when you're traveling, you smell the flowers and the delicious scents, and then they show you a burning Amazon, and suddenly you smell this burning smell. It's amazing. Oh my God. Okay, so that's my homework, to get that thing here for us.
Yes.
Okay, so that's Amazonia Viva, and then Colombia, another dynamic leader is doing great things. I think I'm within 5 minutes of ending here. So this is the country of Colombia, and this is where there are forests. I just wanted to show you, okay, so forests here, and the Amazon is the dark color. And then this yellow is where the highest deforestation is happening and where indigenous people's rights should be violated. And so this is where the local chapters of the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative are, overlapping where the problem is. And the way they work is just genius. I never would have thought of this myself. But what they do is they, with the intention to use municipal and statewide elections to further their goals, the IRI Columbia team brings the candidates during the election for mayor and the candidates for governor together to have debates. And they put them on TV and radio. And in the debates, the candidates have an opportunity to commit to, if elected, to actively promote rainforest protection and take a stand for indigenous peoples. That's what they do when they do these these debates. And then after the elections, the IRI Columbia people come back to them and say, okay, now deliver. And so they've got agreements to have their representatives serve on local and statewide planning council to monitor the forests and land use planning, and basically to ensure the commitments are implemented. By last year, they have 42 local chapters all over the country, and they are enabling indigenous peoples, the scientists, and religion to work powerfully together. So it's just sheer genius, very powerful. And then in Democratic Republic of Congo, here's Reverend Mathieu is the head of that. Just a short statement about that. In DRC, religious leaders contributed significantly to indigenous issues by bringing their considerable moral authority and political influence to bear in support of a decade-long campaign by indigenous networks in DRC to successfully lobby government to adopt a new law in November 2022 on the promotion and protection of the rights of indigenous peoples. Never happened in that country. And it was languishing for 10 years until the religious leaders got together, the Muslims, the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Catholics, the Protestants, all together and said, we support this. And the law passed. So this is an example of religious leaders making a difference for indigenous peoples and climate. Last one, IRI Indonesia. Just last month, religious leaders through this IRI initiative, together with partners and led by the Ulama Council of Indonesia, the highest authority on Islamic law in the country, issued a fatwa against actions that cause climate change. A fatwa cites the Quran and carries significant moral weight with the Muslim majority population. So, and several important fatwas have happened. In 2011, there was one forbidding destructive mining operations. 2014, forbidding activities which would threaten endangered species. 2016, a fatwa forbidding the burning of forests. And now they're working on a fatwa to protect indigenous knowledge. So, okay, we're getting close to the end. We're very close. Peru actually has also had success in 3 years advocating for the Ministry of Justice and Human Rights to adopt significant national legislation protecting environmental defenders. And the law has been used where communities who were being attacked for protecting their forests are now protected by this law as environmental defenders. So that really helped with religious leaders to get that law. Okay, so the very last slide here. So the conclusions that I drew are consistent with what we've already said. One is indigenous knowledge, culture, ways of life, and spirituality are key to avoiding catastrophic outcomes from climate and biodiversity loss. Securing indigenous people's rights to their lands and resources is essential for indigenous knowledge and these benefits to be sustained. Number 3, this understanding, along with the allocation of more support and resources to indigenous peoples, has been growing strongly over the past 3 decades since the Rio Earth Summit, along with powerful new partnerships among indigenous peoples, scientists, the UN, NGOs, philanthropies, and governments, and most recently with religious communities. Number 4, I argue that this constitutes one of the most hopeful and game-changing movements to generate effective action on climate and biodiversity. And one such partnership, the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, inspired by Pope Francis, is demonstrating how faith communities can contribute to this body of work. And I also say that the methodology we used with tropical forests in just 5 countries, even though that's 70% of all the forests. Those 5 countries, on those issues, that technology, that methodology could be useful, for other issues and other geographies. So that's it. That's what I have to do. Patience. I can't believe we got through all 3 of those. My God.
Thank you so much, Charles. We have a few more minutes, so I'm going to open it up to anybody who would have a question. We've got about 10, 15 minutes.
Or comments. I'm not a know-it-all. I want a lot of real experts in this room, right? So this is not question answer. This is dialogue with informed, smart people. Monsieur Mather. Mather.
Thank you, Charles. 2 things. Pope Francis is a chemist from Argentina, so you can see the science background.
Yes.
The other one is this relates to Bowen, and that BC Timber Sales is now revisiting Bowen as a cut lot. 40% of our forests are now back on the potential chopping block. Very soon. So we do need to galvanize as an island to address this massive issue, which we thwarted 5 years ago. But just raising that point, because here is our local rainforest with this real issue. So
thank you.
Andrew, the mayor is talking about bringing a group together to talk about actions, ideas, routes forward. So,
wow, thank you so much. I wonder, is it possible to send a note to the Rotarians with this information? Like if Jay sends it to you, you could send it out to the larger group?
I'll give you my email. Okay.
Great, thank you, that's really helpful. Can someone take some pictures now? Because I took off my glasses, so now I'll look more presentable. I want to do an article for the Undercurrent of some kind. And thank you, Jay. Okay, who else? Fire away. What's on your mind? Yes, Elaine.
I was trying to Google it, but I couldn't see it. I understood that Lula had recently gotten defeated in government. No, not him personally, but a piece of legislation around the Amazon had recently been defeated. Can you say what you know about that?
I don't know about that specific case. Yes, every day there's legislation. They win some, they lose some. I was just on the phone today with Brazilians. They didn't mention anything about it. So, but
This is a couple of months ago sometime.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that one. Absolutely. There was we were involved in a whole global campaign. There were a couple that, exactly, really draconian. It's sort of like in the US in a way, where you could have a Republican Congress and a Democratic president. And they basically revolted and, exactly, this is huge. They undertook an initiative to basically strip Indigenous peoples of their rights. Really, it was just insidious, horrible, life-threatening, and there was a whole campaign around that. The Supreme Court weighed in, unlike in the US where they're doing all the wrong things. The Supreme Court actually in Brazil did the right thing and stopped that from happening. But that was a real serious threat, and the whole world mobilized around it. So that threat is not there for the moment. It could rear its ugly head again for a while, but that was a huge, serious threat. Thank you. Yeah, I forgot. It was absolutely abysmal, and but fortunately, it's stopped for now.
The other thing I was wondering about is whether or not the 3D movie that you were talking about, if that would be something that perhaps Science World would take on.
I just went to Science World a couple of weeks ago. I love that place.
Yes.
What a great idea.
There's a recent VR kind of 1 hour for $30 or something like this. Visit a space station kind of thing.
Yes, I heard about that.
Yeah.
I heard about that. What a great idea. We're negotiating with the UN headquarters lobby. They want to have it in the UN lobby, so we're going to do that. But I like the Science World idea. Let's bring it home. Okay, Let's start with getting the headsets and getting the file. But thank you.
IMAX theater still there?
Is the
Yes.
IMAX
Yeah.
theater?
Yes.
Yeah, because that would be great.
Wow. Okay. Very good. What else? What else?
Carmen.
I just want to thank you. This is an overwhelming amount of information that is relevant to our past, present, and future, and especially to our present and future for our future generations. And you have touched so many incredibly important points. The first part was how we can, I was raised, the second part actually.
You were raised Catholic?
So,
Wow.
yeah.
I want to be a Catholic now.
Well, they're more Catholic than I am, and I ever will be. Providence. However, thank you for sharing that. We have been fortunate enough to be in the Vatican, and we know what an amazing experience that is. So, but that is amazing. But the first part, you mentioned that it was very interesting to see the three last year, this year, and the next year that is going to be held the COP28.
Yeah.
7, 28, and I guess 29 will be the next one. And they have been held in oil producing countries, which you said was a problem, which is probably a conflict of interest. That's probably what you were referring to. Do you
Yeah.
see them moving on to renewable resources? Am I being hopeful or naive?
No, you're being insightful. And you know, some people would argue, and they might be right, that having this last COP in Dubai, in United Arab Emirates, actually gave more potential for an agreement, because the president of the COP, who was also the head of the national oil company, who was quoted for saying that there's no science supporting that phasing out fossil fuel was needed, or something like that. It was a huge controversy in the middle of the COP. But could it be that he could have wrestled those interests to the ground and get a better deal than maybe another country? So that's possible, but it does raise questions, and it's a little bit of an artifact that this happened. Also with Azerbaijan, for each region, it rotates region. This next region is Eastern Europe, so freaking Putin had a voice in where that country led. And for 2 days during the COP, Putin was refusing to agree to any other country. And the one country he would agree to is Azerbaijan. So global politics come into this in a really ugly way. And I can't see how Azerbaijan's going to be the right setting for breakthroughs. But I'll keep an open mind. COP30 will be in Brazil. So I'm very encouraged about that, the potential of Brazil, cementing some kind of a breakthrough.
When you mentioned I'll just follow up on that question. You mentioned a 15% increase on or decrease on the damage to the rainforest. Well, Bolsonaro had given a carte blanche to all the farmers, right, to clear all their land and all the rainforest that they wanted to destroy.
Yeah.
So that 15%, as positive as it looks, is it good enough to make a difference?
Oh,
Or
the
it
50%, you mean in Brazil we're talking about?
Right.
No, I mean, the 50% is significant, it's in the right direction. But Lula with Minister Marina Silva, in the period from 2004 to 2012, there was an historic reduction in deforestation rate in Brazil by 80%. They were able to drive the deforestation rate while increasing food production. So it's not rocket science. We know how to do it. They know how to do it. It's a matter of policies, enforcement of laws, empowering indigenous peoples, protected areas, and a slew of things, and the right financial incentives. So there's a way to get it to work. They're on the right track now. Now, Lula, though, I think is now presented with another challenge. They've discovered a lot of oil in Brazil. He's going to have to make a decision about that. So there could be that they may become more of an emitter than they are right now. But on the forest side, they're definitely doing the right things, and it's a lot of the areas of highest deforestation are areas that didn't vote for him. So politically, he's a little bit it's not unstable, but he's at risk. He needs to keep his majority. So it's not a sure thing. He needs to be supported, but it's very encouraging what's happened so far. Monique and Monsieur Dallaire.
So, COP30 will be in Brazil in 2027.
No, 2025.
2020, it's every year.
Yeah. The climate COP is every year. The biodiversity COP is every 2 years for some reason. But yeah, so it'll be in Bowen, which is in the Amazon.
Oh yes.
I've been there. I can't imagine hosting. They won't be able to hold 85,000 people like Dubai did. Yeah.
A question of how is Canada on board with all of this? Are we like what's our government
Good
stuff doing?
Good question. When I did a talk about the biodiversity COP in Montreal, I followed very carefully what Canada did, and they did a great job on most fronts. And so, in this COP, I wasn't paying too much attention. I didn't see. I think I saw Stephen Gibault running around and doing important things. I think they certainly didn't do anything that would upset the environmental community. I think they were fairly progressive. But I didn't, as I said on the Biodiversity Convention, I saw exactly all the initiatives they spotted. This one I didn't look into that, but I'm fairly confident they did the right things. And next time I'll do my homework on that front. I ran out of time on this talk, but I think they were doing pretty good things. Hey Robert, could you do a photo of the whole group from the very back? It's going to look like 300 people are here. From the very back. Yes, sir.
I just wondered if you've got a site set on roping in the Dalai Lama.
Yes, I love the Dalai Lama. I have a picture of me with the Dalai Lama.
This wasn't
in 1987, I had lunch with the Dalai Lama and tea with him. That's a whole other story. I love that guy. He's amazing. He's doing incredible
There's
things.
a lot of following, not
Yes,
so much as the Pope,
yeah.
but work, I think, can't take him.
No, he's fantastic. I just hate the way China is waging war against him and the whole culture. It just breaks my heart. But no, he's awesome and right on message with all of these issues. Monsieur Dallaire, sorry.
Well, it was just a comment that I really appreciate the detail that you were able to fit in there, because I do feel more positive. There's lots of negative stuff to talk about, and I'm a generally negative thinker, so that's a good thing. But I think the reason I feel more empowered is that you've kind of teased out like 20 different initiatives, and it feels to me like every year one or two go forward, and we get shocked and disgusted with the ones that don't go forward.
Yes.
But there's that creeping movement, and so that does bring me hope.
Yes.
And I appreciate all the effort you put into that. It's amazing scope. I don't know how you do it.
Thank you. It's fun, and as I say, I don't ever take time to sort of reflect on anything until I have to. And you Rotary people make me do that, where I have to sit down and think, like, what the heck is going on? Monsieur Okin.
Thanks, sir. I just want to build from what John said. I mean, I learned a lot from what you said. I'm pretty familiar with all the COP stuff. And, it was good to hear what you said. And there's, of course, the trouble is always the backsliding that happens afterwards, the implementation. And the point that you made that civil society is actually ahead, I agreed with you on that, but I was unaware of all the things that you've described. So you've actually given me new information, like John's saying, that has given me the interfaith stuff and working with the Indigenous folks. That's amazing achievements, and you're really making that point much more strongly than just sort of a general statement. So it was great to hear. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. And remember, I'm quitting next week, so I'm a free agent after next week. I'll still advise and so on, but I won't be doing that.
Well, that's great. I've got an international organization I'd like you to.
No, but thank you. And it's true. I worked, as Julia said, in an NGO on ending hunger for a number of years. So I was, always scrambling for money and so on. And it was all mission-driven, purpose-driven. NGOs, civil society, working with a kind of single-minded focus. And I think I mentioned in my last talk that my grandfather represented Canada in the League of Nations. So as a 4-year-old, I got an idea in my head. We can do better. I'm going to do something in the international family. So when I joined the UN, my commitment has been to bring that civil society, mission-driven, focused kind of way of working into the UN, not to kill the bureaucracy and bring life into the UN. So that's why I focused a lot on empowering indigenous peoples and local communities, to try to bring the power and influence of the UN to prop up, to support civil society and the underprivileged and so on. So that's been my mission all along. So now I need a new mission after next week. Madam Kizan.
I remember when, before you went to Dubai, that we had to talk about it was strange that first the leaders came together and then the whole
Yes.
COP would take place.
Yes.
How did that work out?
Oh,
at
good
the
question. I
end?
forgot about that. Normally in these COPs, the first COP, there's 2 weeks, and the first week is the minister, well, not even ministers, but lower level government people fighting it out, trying to reach agreement. And then the ministers come in to try to solve difficult issues. And then the heads of state come in, the presidents and prime ministers come in to really, stamp their approval, like in Paris. For some reason, they reversed it and had the head of state show happen in the first few days. And I was uneasy about that, thinking, how is that going to end up with a good agreement? Because the senior people will have left, and then the fighting will commence and continue. As it turned out, I guess there was an understanding in each government of what their position was that held all the way through. So they could reach agreement. And it went a day and a half longer than it should have as they hammered it out. So somehow those last standing negotiators had the authority to reach agreement after all. But I've forgotten about that. I was very worried about that, but somehow the issue disappeared somehow. Thank you. All right. Oh, Cynthia.
Just a little question. So what does the Pope wear when he goes to breakfast?
He's yes, yeah,
He always in robes?
yeah, just like that. Yeah.
Just
And naughty. Naughty. Yeah.
No, but the other one is really, this is huge. I really appreciate that you do this. Can we as an island do anything? Us little peons down here.
Yes.
I know the governments have to do so much I know becoming a vegetarian and driving an electric car is obvious.
I know, Charles, but I know that holding the line on Bowen as far as preservation, forestry, and all of that stuff, our water resources, that's one way that we can
Yeah.
contribute to that.
Yeah, I think lead by example, and Jay and David and John and some of the world's experts here can really help, and Levin and Judith can really help in guiding us on that. When I came out of the biodiversity COP15 in Montreal, where Canada led the way to beat into submission every country on earth to agree to 30% protected land and ocean by 2030, I came back and told David and John and Levin and Jay, let's have Bowen be a leader in getting to that 30% first, and by have a little community lead. And that's why I've been so supportive of a park at the Cape, is that'll put us up to 19.8% if we have the
Yeah, I think it was something like that.
something around roughly 19.8%. But so things like that, to have Bowen, and as a New Yorker, in and out of New York for 30 years, can you imagine? And I would always come to this island from New York. I was always so surprised at the environmental ethic here. People were so concerned. In New York, to this day, it's a pain to compost. You can almost not compost in New York. You have to freeze your stuff, walk 3 blocks, 10 blocks, and like that. And I was so surprised at how Bowen was always, and the recycling, people volunteered. I've been inspired for decades about how this little community has such an environmental ethic. And I'd go back to this other city, same size as this one, with 100,000 times more people, and that ethic was gone. So I think as a community, we can punch above our weight. We can lead by example and have certain campaigns and say, look at me, look what we're doing, inspire bigger communities. But you know, in our own lives, there's lots of things to do. But as a community, I think there are things we can do as well.
Can I just
Please.
say something? The Bowen Island Conservancy is initiating a biodiversity study on Bowen, and it's going to be community driven. So we're going to be starting with like public engagement in the fall, and if people could come to that and express their values about what they value about Bowen's nature, animals, what they've seen over their lifetime, that could really empower a process like what Charles is talking about. So I'd really encourage all of you to get involved and
We had Alan Whitehead.
Keep reminding us.
Oh, yeah.
Dates and places.
Absolutely, yeah. We're just sort of figuring out the process right now, but you'll hear more about it.
Alan Whitehead kind of gave a big presentation on some of the
Oh,
material
right,
he
yeah,
presented,
exactly. Yeah,
so that
he's
was
in group.
good. We're going to wrap up.
Okay, and one question, if, you know, it took me 5 days or so since I landed jet lag and I went to work on this, and I would like to be able to do it. This is a trial run. You're guinea pigs, right? This is the first time I've ever said most of this stuff. But if you see other places where I should do this, now that I've done the work, I'd like to be able
We
to
like Rotary.
do it with other groups. Well, it'll be even better the next time. But if you have ideas where I can do this kind of, maybe not all 3 parts, maybe A, B, or C, maybe not A, B, and C. But if you have ideas, because now that I've done the work, I would like to be able to get some of this stuff out there.
I know that Robert is going to do some post-production, and I'm hoping that we'll have something on the website of some of this tonight. So
You should do
it'll
the
probably
ferry.
take a month.
Wednesdays on the ferry. Hillary, dangerous goods. You could be out there though.
Dangerous. Take just a moment. Hillary, something to say.
I'd just like to thank you so much on behalf of the Rotary Club for A, being a member, and B, giving us this amazing talk tonight. It has been so inspiring and so informative because, you know, we hear about COP28 and it kind of passes through our minds and disappears. But when we have someone around who has actually been there, who's been involved in the interfaith rainforest initiative, which I forgot to mention, it's just phenomenal, and we are so grateful to you for coming here this evening and doing all that work.
Thank you. My pleasure.